Call the meeting to order. Certify compliance with the open records law.
Yes.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Gillis.
Here.
Councilmember Hartman.
Here.
Councilmember Booker.
Here.
Councilmember Riesler.
Here.
Councilmember Schneider.
Here.
Councilmember Schofield.
Here. Next, pledge of allegiance. Pledge of allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would somebody like to make a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. It's adopted. Next, we move on to public comments. The floor is now open for anybody who'd like to make any public comments. Please identify yourself for the record.
Nobody? I'm Brian Winnikins, obviously from WRDN. Dan's going to probably know kind of what I'm talking about, but I wanted to talk to the council and those watching for a minute. A situation that has developed in our industry over the last 5 years or so. In about 2017, a new music rights group showed up called Global Music Rights, and basically for the radio station we have to pay artists and writers for when we play music. And this was a brand new group, and what they did was they signed some of the largest artists for different formats to force stations to pay them to play the music. We couldn't drop certain artists because they were just too big in our format. Over the years, there's been a couple of lawsuits from a radio industry group that represents stations to do negotiations with the traditional rights groups like BMI and ASCAP. And basically what happened was this new group called Global Music Rights. They basically in the last year they've been able to make a private deal with some of the 10 biggest radio companies in the country. They'll give them a nice deal on paying these fees, but you have to leave this group and take your money with, so that basically they can't continue to have lawyers. And so the first week of January, we received from the group that represents a lot of the smaller radio stations that there's a settlement for these lawsuits. Here's this confidential agreement. You can't talk to other radio stations. You can't talk to your congressman about it. You can't, nothing. It's a confidential agreement, and here are the fees you're going to pay. And we're not going to tell you how we figured it out. There's no negotiation with it. We're not going to tell you really where the money's going. You have until January 31st to sign this. If you don't sign it, then you don't have any type of license to play our music. And if you don't have that license, then we can sue you by law, legally, up to $150,000 per time. So obviously this is being held to our head. It's like a gun to our head. I get an email from these folks every 2 days going, you haven't signed yet, you better. You don't have to, but remember, this is what's going to happen. And there's no type of, we've asked, how did you come up with these rates? The rates for me would double over the next 3 years, and we don't know what they're based on. They just said, here's your rate, pay it. Now, obviously for me and other smaller stations, we have some serious issues if these groups just start popping up left and right. There could be a new group next week. There could be another one, whatever. I mean, eventually we would be run out of business. It just would be simple as that. But there's another part of this that I think the city needs to know and the community needs to know is that the way this whole system has worked in the past, or currently works by law, like with the current groups like ASCAP and BMI, Travis probably knows who I'm talking about because he owns a bar. Herb knows what I'm talking about because he owned a bar, and that is they have to pay rights fees every year. If they're going to have live music, they have to pay a fee. By law, they're required to. So they're supposed to pay these rights fees if they're going to have live music. Now, after a while, if there's this new group, they're going to have to pay for them too. And after a while, what's going to happen is Travis is going to be like, there's just too many of these fees. It's too much. I'm not going to have Dan's band at my bar anymore. I'm not going to do any live music, period. That ain't going to happen. And I haven't talked to Dan personally, but I've talked to some other artists that I do know that are like Dan. They're a singer and a songwriter, so they kind of do both. But they've lost the ability to play at venues because the venues are saying, we're not going to play here anymore. Or we're not going to have live music anymore because we can't afford this. It's getting out of control. The other part of this, though, is it's not just Travis's bar or when Herb had a bar. It's not just the bars. Fun Fest, if they have live music and they have a band that is playing not their original stuff, they're playing, I'll use the White Sidewalls. They potentially, well, legally, they're supposed to pay a rights fee. Actually, Cheryl Brantner called me a couple of years ago when she was on Durand Improvement Group saying, I got this guy from a place called BMI asking why aren't we paying them for our bands? Is that legit? And I'm like, okay, well, this is what this is about. This group, I will tell you, the GMR group isn't going to probably be like BMI or ASCAP, where they're going to say, oh, you're a nonprofit group, we'll make a deal with you. They don't have to do that by law, but we'll do something because you're a nonprofit. The person that formed Global Music Rights is the owner of Live Nation. He's the guy that puts on all these really big, giant music festivals and that sort of thing. That's why he made a deal with one of the biggest radio companies in the country, iHeartRadio, because they have, if you've heard of it, the iHeart Music Festival in Vegas or the iHeart Country Festival, wherever they have that in Nashville. Well, that's with all these big artists that this guy does all the promotion for. You kind of figure out where the money's going here. I will tell you that the guy from GMR, they do not care what it does to the smaller rural radio stations. They frankly do not care. And so I'm the canary in the coal mine where once they're done with people like us, they will come after these smaller events. They will. This guy just does not care. He's out for blood or out for money. The other problem, even with the traditional things, and this may have even happened to Dan. I'm not sure, I haven't talked to him, but one of my artists that I know, like Dan, singer-songwriter, released some music, okay, he's released music. I played it on the radio, okay? Now, we pay fees to ASCAP. He's a member of ASCAP, so that's another one of these groups. He's supposed to get paid for that. I'm paying the rights fees, I'm playing his music, I should pay him. But because even the traditional groups, ASCAP and BMI, they've made big deals with the big record labels that the reporting is only coming from the real big markets on the coasts. So even though my friend, who I'm doing a favor for, and I like his music, I played on my radio station, and he deserves something, he gets nothing. Because ASCAP says, you're too small and we can't figure it out and we're not going to do it. Now that's not fair to him. That might even be with Dan. That might not be fair to Dan if he had, Dan's had a couple, I know he's released a couple of albums or, singles. Dan doesn't get paid by these guys. That's wrong. That's totally wrong. And so what I'm asking the council to do, and I talked with Scott a little bit, but what I'm asking the council and those kind of watching to do is I've contacted Congressman Kine's office about this. Obviously, I can't be the only one complaining, but I've told him, a couple of things. One, the Justice Department needs to really look at this agreement between that GMR came up with the Radio Music Licensing Committee. That's the group that represented the smaller radio stations that we paid the fee to. That how did all of a sudden they, did these guys go illegally behind the scenes to get the big stations out so that they could starve us and force a very bad agreement on us? That's the first thing. The other thing is to actually have an open and honest conversation. I suggested to Congressman Kine that you have a working group of someone who knows copyright law, like a professor from UW-Eau Claire, along with artists like maybe Dan or Jim from Bistrovelt or that sort of thing. I'm Scott, my friend down in Toma. Okay, have maybe some of the other, like a bar owner or, somebody from a festival or a fair, somebody like me on radio, and we all have an open and honest conversation about how these copyright rules for music, which were wrote in the 30s and 40s in a different era, how can they, what do we have to change so that it's fair to not only the musician and the songwriter who deserves to be paid, but also the end user, i.e. Durand Improvement Group, Travis's Bar, the fire department, and Brian at the radio station. Because it's just gotten to the, it's really gotten just to the point of, I will tell you that the way these fees go, if we get another performance rights group, that's what they call them in the industry, if we get another group or two other groups, I will have to make some pretty hard decisions down the road because there'll be no way I could afford it. And part of this is I can't just switch to talk radio because talk radio has music. If you've ever listened to it, there's music at the end, when they're going into a commercial and then when they're coming out and the host comes back on, that's called bumper music. A lot of times that's a song you might recognize. That makes me liable. So I'd still have to pay those fees. I still would have to. So I can't do that. The only format I could do that's now, according to the federal law, in the public domain is any music recorded prior to 1923. That's it. Well, I don't have 78 RPM turntables, and I sure as heck don't know where I could find the shellac discs to actually play them to make it work. So I'm asking the council and those watching to contact Congressman Kine's office and tell him, and contact the DC office, call his DC phone number, and the person there that I'm working with is Olivia, and just you can leave a message with her saying, this GMR agreement and how this is coming about with radio, we're kind of concerned about it, not only for our radio station, but also for our events, and can we look at the rules, the copyright rules for music, because it's unfair to our local artists too. The bands are losing, they're losing venues and they're losing the ability to play, and then if they have something that they've done and I play it and I'm paying the fee, they should be getting that money. It shouldn't be just kept for the big people on the coasts. So that's kind of the 3-minute version of it. So any questions?
Do you have a number?
I can, before I go, I'll get his DC number, I'll look it up, because it's a 202 number. But I just wanted to let everybody know about it, because this could get worse as the time goes on, but.
Okay.
All right, thanks, guys.
Any other questions for him? Okay, are there any other public comments? Again, please identify yourself for the record. No scheduled appearances. We'll move on to the consent agenda. The following matters may be acted upon by the City Council utilizing a single vote. Individual items, which any member wishes to address in greater detail or as a separate item on the regular agenda, may be removed from the consent agenda upon the request of any council member. We have the minutes from the regular City Council meeting, January 12th, 2022, and a bartender license for Chase E. Brunkow for the Durand Fresh Market.
Everything's fine.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. It's approved. Next we move on to a public hearing. The purpose of this public hearing is citizen participation for the Community Development Block Grant for the 3rd Avenue East Street and infrastructure reconstruction. Again, this is a requirement, I believe, with all the things that we do with the community, with that program. So anyway, I will hereby declare this public hearing open, with the first item being discussion regarding the Cdbg FP project and progress to date. Russ?
Good evening. I introduce to you Renee Swenson from Cedar Corporation. She's here with me tonight to present this public hearing item number 7 on your agenda. Renee was very instrumental in working with the team to write the successful Cdbg grant and obtain some of the environmental approvals and so forth as part of that process. And then she's been the one processing your payment application application request and getting reimbursement, so Renee's been doing all the CDBG grant administration on this project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Renee.
So this public hearing is to give an update on the public facility project with the city of Durand received an award of $1 million for the Community Development Block Grant CDBG program in late August of 2020. This award was for the 3rd Avenue East Street and infrastructure reconstruction. Currently, the project is approximately 98% complete. The project started April 2021 and proceeded as expected with no substantial delays or issues. The project consisted of removal and replacement of sanitary sewer and manholes, removal and replacement of water main, and installation of new fire hydrants, construction of storm sewer and inlets, and construction of street including sidewalk, curb, and gutter. The project is completed except for confirmation of satisfactory grass vegetation establishment, which will take place this spring. It's expected that the project will be completed before summer 2022. In accordance with the CDBG program, all construction activities are to be completed no later than October 31st, 2022, which means we are ahead of the state's completion deadline. As the project moves along, reimbursement requests have been submitted on a regular basis. The city has received $828,854 of the $1 million. The final payment request and project completion report is required to be submitted to the state no later than December 31st, 2022, which means we will submit much earlier once all construction activities have been completed. Once the project completion paperwork is submitted to the state, the city will receive project completion paperwork from the state. Are there any questions?
With the, $1 million was the maximum, based on where we're at with the project, how much of that $1 million do we will recoup?
I'm not sure. I can't give an answer until we have the final payout, because it's a percentage of what goes towards the project.
Oh, no, I understand that. I
Oh.
said we've already received $850,000.
Yep.
The question is, so that means we could potentially get another $150,000.
Yep.
How much more are we going to get, approximately, ballpark? That's the question.
I'm trying to remember what the last pay request, which is pretty close to the final, but it would be a maximum of 66% of that number.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, we're probably going to end up with about $900,000.
A little less than that, I think.
A little bit, but that's, again, but I know it's based on cost of the project, so it's based on cost
Yeah.
of the project, so. Okay.
Any other questions?
And to clarify, we maximize that to the best of our ability.
Yeah.
That's
Any other questions concerning that part of it, the progress of the project?
And then eligible CDBG activities, I'll just go through these. You have housing, which you guys already have this program, but eligible activities include roofing, siding, windows, furnace, insulation, down payments, and handicap accessibility. That's your housing program that you guys have. Planning, eligible activities include comprehensive plans, community development plans, and neighborhood plans. Public facility, eligible activities are improvements, repairs, expansions of streets, drainage systems, water and sewer systems, sidewalk and community centers. Economic development, eligible activities are business loans to expand facilities or purchase equipment and specialized employee training. Public facility for economic development include public infrastructure projects that support business expansion or retention. Identification of any community development needs by the public. If you feel there is a potential CDBG project that the city would be like to pursue or discuss, please contact the planning team at Cdcorp and we would be happy to review this with you. That's it.
While we're here also, were there any other citizen input concerning the subject? Just open it up for anybody. Okay. Any other questions from the council? Anything else for the hearing from either of you?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, hearing nothing else, I hereby declare this public hearing closed. Next, we'll move on to the business agenda. Mayor's report. A couple of things. I'm going to pass around. Thank you. We got, obviously, one of our longtime election workers had passed away. We had sent flowers from the Dorothy Preisel family, and so there's a thank you. I'll pass that along. Just to remind everybody that the swimming pool, the Save Our Pool group is going to have their fun day coming up on Saturday, February the 5th. Again, that'll be at Tarrant Park from 1 till 5. They mentioned at the last meeting, and just want to remind anybody that would like to attend. I know they've got a bunch of fun activities planned for that. One of the things I'm going to mention is obviously at the last meeting we scheduled several committee meetings, including finance that met. We also have got the parks coming up. The Economic Development Committee was going to meet, but because of some conflicts, we're still looking for a date for that. And because of some other information that the administrator is putting together for that meeting, but we'll get everybody on that committee set here as soon as we can find a date that works, and then he's been able to put together all the information we need for it, correct? So we'll still be, but we will be having one, but again, based on those factors. Yeah. Anyway, that's all I've got. Any questions? If not, we have nothing that came off the consent agenda. We move on to the administrator's report. Administrator Rasmussen.
I got a few things tonight. Some of them are a little bit of a catch-up from not being at the last meeting. First thing on the list, I know that Evan Mercer spoke to you at the last meeting. Just wanted to update you that I have spoken with Mr. Mercer as well. We came to a nice agreement that I'm going to be crafting the letter that will go to the state, and he's going to use it for some other purposes. But again, we've already had one. Recall the council put together a letter, gosh, that's probably more than a year ago, regarding to the DOT when we were basically asking them to open the bridge. We're just going to modify that letter a little bit and kind of keep the ball rolling. And I know Evan's got some other entities that he needs to talk to, but know that that's in the works, and so we're going to work on that. Secondly, again, another one from the last meeting. Obviously, Mr. Tigan was here and a nice presentation. Just kind of following up that, that project is obviously coming up pretty quickly here. As part of the city's commitment to that project, we did commit roughly not to exceed $150,000, or half of the cost of the road work going in. Again, we're not doing the work, we don't have to bid the work, we're just basically reimbursing a quick trip at some point. But related to that, we're going to have a TIP amendment to make that, because it's in the TIP district. We're going to have, in order to make that 150,000 or up to 150,000 eligible, we'll get that process started. We also talked a little bit at finance. We got another, few areas within our TIP district. Bubba's is in our TIP district, Bubba's building. When the county kind of figures out what the process is there, and hopefully we see some future development there. I don't know if the city's going to be asked for any help with that, but again, we'll get that out there. And a few other things are brewing as well that we'll be talking about when we have that Economic Development Committee. And again, a continued update with that will be our discussions with Bob Bassani, I think is how he pronounces it, the Dunn County Economic Development Director, which again, recall that we have $5,000 committed toward the $10,000 that the Dunn County Economic Development Association was looking for. At this point, it's my understanding that the county is not quite on board yet. I'm not sure that they will be, but we're working on some other items there. So again, we'll talk about those more at economic development as well. What else do I have? Housing Authority. Recall that I've mentioned a few times that the Pepin County Housing Authority, we've been getting payment in lieu of tax payment every year for 40 plus years. I think early 1970, that best I can find from the minutes. Last couple of years, Landmark, who runs the payment program for them, has balked at giving ourselves and the Village of Pepin their payment because they couldn't find basically an agreement in place. I've worked with Vicki Asher, chair of that committee, where basically we think we've got to a good point where the city's going to get its money for 2021 and 2020 that we didn't get paid, and a going forward agreement that seems to be working out pretty well. Ms. Hallowen with Landmark has worked pretty hard on that as well. It looks as though the Housing Authority is going to approve that, knock on wood, at their February meeting. So again, I'll keep you apprised on that, but know that process is almost completed. We're on this a little bit. Sidewalk issues and then snow removal. We talked about that before I left in December. Basically, we had our first real test with that a couple weeks ago. And went out and I guess there was about 10 properties that we put those on. Had some questions from those involved. Ultimately, they all got done. I think there's only one out there from a house that's kind of in limbo, changing hands on sale. So we're cutting them a little bit of slack. It's on Madison, so it's a little out of the way. Everyone else has been doing pretty well though. I know this recent snowfall, I think there's a few out there yet. Be honest with you, I wasn't going out delivering them the last couple of days, and B, I wasn't going to make anyone go and shovel. But now the more I'm up here the next couple of days, we'll get on that again for those properties that require that. But I would say the initial round of those door hangers, it worked very well. The response was very quick, and they got done. Just a reminder, another item that came up at finance tonight, talking about ARPA funding. Just keep in mind that that's still out there. That we still have the opportunity. We'll continue to talk about potential items. It'll come up a little bit later when we talk about the project and the liquidated damages and things of that nature. But that's again, that's on our list as well. And again, just wanted to make sure that that stayed out there for future discussion and keep that in the back of your mind. One of the things that I did bring up, and I think I brought this up before, is my recommendation, the county is basically soliciting donations. Donations, that's not the right word. Soliciting basic projects for the $1.4 million that they got. Frankly, I'm not recommending that for the city from the standpoint of, we don't have near as much as they have, obviously. Roughly 180,000 versus 1.4 million. We clearly have projects that we can use it on, as Matt has said numerous times. We have water sewer projects that we could probably spend those money tenfold. And I guess the other deciding for a factor of that is clearly the citizens of Durand are eligible county residents, and if there's issues, whether business or whatnot, clearly I would ask you to fill out the paperwork for the county. And all they can do is say no. So, sorry, a little long-winded, but I missed last meeting, so that's all I have.
Any questions for the city administrator?
Is the county responsible for this property sidewalks?
Yes, thank you, Terry, and that did come up, and they've been contacted. Again, I think maybe just a little bit of an oversight there, that clearly they...
I got asked about it, and
Yeah.
I assumed it was them. But...
Yeah, so that was one of the sidewalk issues that I think is still hanging out there a little bit. I know it's the same thing yesterday. And yeah.
Okay. Any other questions for the city administrator? Next, we'll move on to discussion of possible action regarding a zoning variance request from Terry Hartung at 713 West Prospect Street for a variance from section 8.3.3F, which sets the maximum building height for accessory structures. Mr. Hartung is looking to build an accessory building approximately 22 feet high, which currently exceeds the code of 15 feet. This variance has gone in front of the Board of Appeals, and if Administrator Rasmussen would like to explain what happened through there.
Yeah, I would. First off, I apologize. I meant to put that on my memo that I sent, just a short blurb, because I know most of you haven't seen that. But both items, both Mr. Hartung's and Mr. Oss items, were very straightforward, very similar to some variance requests that the committee acted on for two citizens on Country Lane just last year as well. Both, obviously Mr. Hartung, and I'm sorry, I'm going to be jumping ahead to Mr. Roth here, but just we're talking about the same thing. They were both at the meeting to answer some minor questions. Ultimately, the committee looked at this and recommended that both properties be allowed to go to 22, up to, not to exceed 22 feet high, because maybe even as Terry can explain, if he so chooses, that at this point, there's still a little variation of just what exactly the peak will be. So again, I think in both cases, 22 is going to work. The neighborhoods that they're in, there's not a whole lot else there. So it's not, we didn't have any other citizen input or anything along those lines. So at this point, again, staff is recommending this, and clearly the zoning commission recommends both, the zoning board of appeals have both recommended approving these unanimously.
Okay, so we'll have the first one that's on for Mr. Hartung at 713 West Prospect Street. Are there any questions concerning it?
What is it that drives the need for the 22 feet? Is it the size of the building, what you can store in
The
there?
size of the building.
The size dictates that, the pitch.
Yeah, 412, I don't know the exact math, but when you go up at an angle, the wider you go up from it, it gets higher.
I want to explain exactly where this,
50-foot span.
explain exactly where this property is for everybody.
Yeah, sorry.
It's adjacent to the St. Mary's, same side of the street, right across the drainage ditch. So, we only have, the closest neighbors are 2 lots away.
Should we be looking at changing the ordinance? I mean, here we are, this is gonna be
Yeah, the fourth one.
the fourth
Yeah,
one, and
yeah.
I don't wanna pick on people, but I know with it's totally escaping my mind right now, the project going after people, what am I thinking of?
Special assessment.
Special assessment, it was quoted that, well, that ordinance in place for a reason, and we need to follow it. Well, here's, now kind of a, third and fourth time where we're just kind of like, let's forget about that ordinance. So I think we look at the ordinance.
Although that ordinance is one thing a little bit different on this one here. There's a
I'm just saying-
right to come in and ask for variance.
I'm just saying, if we're on the third and fourth time of somebody wanting a difference in this ordinance, let's look at the ordinance, can we change it?
I was gonna say the same thing. I don't know when it was wrote, but obviously buildings are bigger now.
Yeah, and we did discuss,
Yep, it
Board of
was
Appeals did
discussed,
discuss it, that there's probably 2 items that we continually get, which is the height, and the other question is also widths of driveways.
Yep.
And probably when that was put into place, it's when driveways were not, So those are the 2 items that we would probably bring forward for discussion. And you're correct, Matt, that has been discussed.
And we need taller buildings to benefit our new fire truck.
There is that. Everyone, and again, I think it makes some sense. Clearly the buildings are bigger and everything that we've looked at seems to make sense. There are still some neighborhoods within the city though where 20 plus feet probably might not make sense. Or the neighbors might have a little bit. So that was the only, downside, I think, to just flat out saying it can be more than 20.
That was basically the opinion of the variance committee or board, was like, it needs to be looked at site by site. You put my 22 footer where I'm putting it, it's a lot different than putting it in a different location where you might overshadow all the houses.
And does that only apply to storage or to sheds?
Accessory buildings.
Accessory
Yes.
buildings, gotcha. So if somebody built a house, though,
Yeah, and I don't want, so like an attached garage, and off the top of my head, I don't know, but that's different. Yeah. I think that one is already 20. But yeah, so it's accessory buildings that,
Besides the height of building, the only other thing that's come up in the 10 years that I know of, we've had a couple situations where we've had requests about variances concerning setbacks, and we've had a couple of those come through, but very few. It's, and we actually, at one point, I know we had somebody who came in one, and they actually took it back and then went back and reconfigured the building, and we worked it out with them at that time, So again, we'll put that on for discussion, future discussion concerning the dimensions that are presently part of our building code. Okay, so again, we have that an issue on. Would somebody like to? Is there any more questions? If not, would somebody like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion, we grant variance to Terry Arton at 713 West Prospect Street to not exceed 22 feet.
second.
We have a motion and second to approve this variance. Is there any more discussion? Hearing none, roll call please.
Councilmember Schofield.
Yes.
Councilmember Raisler.
Yes.
Councilmember Hooker.
Yes.
Councilmember Hartung.
Abstain.
Councilmember Dillis.
Yes.
Councilmember Schneider.
Yes.
All 5 in favor.
Okay, motion's agreed to, variance is granted. Next we move on, discussion and possible action regarding a zoning variance request from Trent Auth for 830 3rd Avenue West for variance from section 8.3.3 F, which sets the accessory building, the maximum building height for accessory structures. Mr. Auth is looking for an accessory building at approximately 22 feet high, which currently exceeds the limit of 15 feet. This also went on the same night as the previous one.
And Mr. Off wasn't sure he was going to be here tonight, obviously he did not make it, but he's been in basically, discussing this with the city for quite some time. Obviously, he was at the zoning board of appeals meeting to answer questions as well. So similar type situation. So where this is located, and obviously you go up 3rd Avenue. If you know where my in-laws live, it's right across the street. So
We're talking right now.
I'm sorry, thank you.
Yeah,
That's a better way of putting it. So, and you can see that, the foundation is there, so again, at this point, he's just waiting. If you're gonna approve this, great, otherwise I'd have to scale it back a little bit. But again, not a big impact on the neighborhood. And I think it's fair to say, one of the things I should have said on Mr. Hartong's project as well, I mean, you're looking at structures that are gonna match pretty well. In Mr. Off's case, it's gonna look just like his house, is what it sounds like, so. Should be a nice project. And again, the committee also approved this unanimously.
To not exceed 22?
To not exceed 22 feet, yeah.
Okay, is there any further discussion, or would somebody like to make a
I'll
motion?
make a motion to grant the variance for Trent off at 830 3rd Avenue West, not to exceed 22 feet.
Second.
We have a motion second to approve the variance request from Trent Oth at 830 3rd Avenue West. Is there any more discussion? Hearing none, roll call please.
Councilmember Schofield.
Yes.
Councilmember Phillips.
Yes.
Councilmember Hartong.
Yes.
Councilmember Hoover.
Yes.
Councilmember Raisler.
Yes.
Councilmember Schneider.
Yes.
Councilmember in favor.
Next we have discussion and possible action regarding the American Legion request for funds for flag replacement. This was actually just previously discussed at the Finance and Personnel Committee. Do you want to talk, or do you want me to?
You can go ahead.
There was a request for $500. The reason why we put it on the agenda was because obviously we were looking for a donation for money that was outside of the budget. In the meantime, after the meeting, I was out in the community and I had some discussions, and I had somebody in the community who said that they would donate the money to pay for the flags, and have the folks from the American Legion get a hold of them. So, so as far as this year is concerned, or whatever, that hopefully that we're all covered, and that private donor will take care of those the donations. The other thing is that, but again, when I had contacted the person who brought this to the council, we talked about saying that this was an ongoing request on a yearly basis to replace the flags. This went to Finance Committee, and the Finance Committee decided, it's yours. Or we did.
It should be a budgeted item, and they should bring in the request during budget time. As long as Pat has already got the money they need for this year.
So anyway, so that's the idea, was we would bring it back to budget time. I mean, if they've requested, we would do that. Are there any questions concerning?
Do we have a replacement cycle for like all of the our flag out here and any like the flags that hang on the streets? Or we just replace those as they get?
Superintendent Gillis, did you?
We replace them as needed. We have a supply downstairs on a shelf. There's half a dozen of them sitting down there, so as we need them, we go down and replace them, and then we just replenish our stock.
Any other questions on the flags? You're done? We'll move on to the police department. Chief Ridgway?
Just have a couple quick updates. We hired a new part-time officer, Jacob Lindsley. He started training last week. He came in for a half a day with me, and then he started Friday night with Sergeant Shellhorn, his training process. He's from Chippewa Falls. He's a part-time officer for Pepin Police Department and Osseo Police Department. Part-time EMT with Bloomer Ambulance, so I've already tried to recruit him to the Durand ambulance service as well. So he actually, his first night, he was with Sergeant Shellhorn. As you probably saw in the press release, we had a drug overdose at an area of business here in the city of Durand. They used Narcan to bring the guy back to. Durand ambulance transported him to the hospital. We were assisted by the Pepin County Sheriff's Department as well. They brought their canine dog down, sniffed on the vehicle that the person arrived in. There was another person with the vehicle. We ended up finding meth and marijuana in the vehicle. So both parties were arrested. The guy that overdosed, he also, two employees of the area business were trying to revive him, doing CPR, life-saving efforts, and they became infected as well. So one was taken by ambulance, one was taken by private vehicle, and so we're going to look at the future, potentially doing something for them, because they did a great job taking care of the guy until law enforcement and EMTs arrived. The officers delivered Narcan. Like I said, they did a great job as well. No officers were infected. They did a good job handling the evidence afterwards. And so it sounded like everything was handled very well at that scene. And I just thank the assistance that we got from the Sheriff's Department, Fire Department, Durand Ambulance, West Central Drug Task Force came in as well and did some things for us, so appreciate their help with that. Last night we did a taser training. We trained with the Pepin Police Department. We did a taser training update, did some scenarios over in the community room and some PowerPoint stuff here in the council chambers. So it was nice to train with those guys and do some great training, do some scenario stuff. We're going to be joining them for field sobriety training in February, and then we'll do some more training, CPR training with them, kind of just keep working with Pepin PD to do some joint trainings. Our hiring process for part-time wrapped up on Friday. I ended up with 4 applicants. None of them had any academy done. They weren't done with the academy. So they were all college students who were just basically looking for an agency to sponsor them through the academy. So nobody that applied would be hireable at this point. So I put the ad back in into WileyNet today, and we'll see what we do. I'm going to contact the tech schools and see if I can go up and do a visit during one of their breaks and try to do some recruitment in person to get some people down here. So that's the plan with that. Anybody have any questions?
If you can, explain the people became infected.
So
The drug transfer to one?
Whether there's smoke in the air or whether you're touching the person and they still have it on their body, it can get into your skin pores, or if there was any lingering effects in the bathroom, there could be an exposure that way. We know how they were probably exposed, but I'm just not going to go into a lot of details regarding that. But you can become exposed in a small room if somebody's smoking something like that, or doing anything if you touch something. So, bathroom has been disinfected, I believe, a couple of times now and back open, so shouldn't be any lingering issues you have to worry about.
Stan, maybe just one piece of that. I mean, it's crystal clear in your press release that these were not local people and this is not a local issue.
Correct. They were
So
driving.
it's probably worth, I know Brian's got a big audience and maybe worth reiterating.
Yep, they were driving through the area on Highway 10, going to another community nearby. They stopped to use the restroom, and that's when it occurred. They were from the Minneapolis area.
Any other questions for the police department? Okay. Move on to the fire department. Chief King?
Don't have much of a report besides just the next agenda item. For next meeting, I'll have in February, I was due the annual report for the year, and also the election. We had our elections Monday night, so we'll need approval for them at the next meeting. So the annual report and approval of officers for the next meeting. Other than that, it's just the next agenda item that I've been working on.
Any questions for the fire chief? If not, we'll move on to discussion, possible action regarding the ladder truck agreement with the rural fire department. Probably have city administrator give a few words. It also went in front of finance committee, and I'll have the chair talk about that. So if you'd like to start.
Sure, I'll start. Basically, the contract you see in front of you, or I should say the agreement between the city and rural. Literally a lot of months in the making, and kudos to Chief King and rural representative Don Harton for the hard work on this. Again, just as a reminder, a couple things. One, especially the time frame for this got crunched a little bit when we discovered that there was going to be the major cost increase at the end of January. So again, kudos to all involved for getting this here before you tonight. So just side note that this was approved at the rural fire meeting. It was also, on top of that, it was also approved by all 10 members of their townships prior to getting to the rural fire group. So basically, a reminder that it's rural whose name is on the lease. So essentially what you see here tonight is just our agreement between the city and rural of how we're going to reimburse them for essentially our 30% portion of the vehicle. And most of the main financing pieces are highlighted in items 4 and 5. But just again, kind of for the record here, at this point we're looking at repaying our down payment, of which the rural down payment is $335,000. Our 30% share of that would be just over $100,000. $100,000, $500,000. At this point, we have the option of repaying that over the 7-year period of the lease, which at this point is what I would recommend unless we fall into some sort of windfall. And then so on top of that, as outlined in item number 4, the total annual lease and outstanding after the down payment by both rural, and I'd be remiss if I didn't include that the $100,000 payment by the Fire Relief Association as well, means that we have rural has an annual lease payment of $124,143.50, of which our 30% portion would be $37,243. So if you combine, so basically, by agreeing to this agreement, we're committing ourselves to $37,243 for 7 years for sure. If we go the route of repaying our down payment of the $116,112 a year, then our annual payment would be $53,355.71 for 7 years. After that time, the rural and city would jointly own the vehicle on a 30-70% split, free and clear. No other payments and anything of that sort. So I mean, that's the main gist, I think, for us. I don't think that there's nothing else in here that requires any update. The only one that we're thinking maybe is on number 11 regarding the insurance. It has nothing to do with us at this point. This is basically, at some point, Rural's is going to have to figure out, in talking to the financing company, what exactly they need to have the insurance on it, and then obviously has had that amount. And then at the end of the day, the city would be on the hook for 30% of that. But again, so they're not quite sure what that number is, but it's, at this point, that's not going to hold up this agreement. So again, this is kind of the end of the road. Once this is approved, be ordering the vehicle, sending the down payment, and construction will start. So.
And this was went in front of Finance Committee before. Committee Chair Schofield, if you'd like to update.
Yeah, Scott went over pretty much the same with us at Finance, and Finance Committee recommends approving this agreement with the rural.
Chief King?
I got one thing just to add to that, the touch on the agreement with the rest of the trucks by our annual meeting.
Oh, yeah, I was going to mention that.
Okay.
Yeah. So from the standpoint of, so again, this obviously covers the ladder truck agreement. It moves us one giant step closer to a little more equitable split on everything. So again, we're 30-70 on this. This agreement does not talk about future other purchases, turnout gear, things like that, and other splits for payroll and whatnot. But rural does want to have that in place by the time they meet at their annual meeting in April. So again, Mr. Hartung and I and Chief King will continue the final work on that. And again, I mean, never say never, but it doesn't look like we're getting to a consolidated department, still two separate. But I think just about everything else the city was looking to get, we should be there by April. So again, a lot of hard work, and kudos again to Jamie and Mr. Hartung and again the rural fire approval. So
There just wasn't enough time to get the completed portion of the rest of it by our deadline to catch our discounts and our money breaks for the truck. That's why it's gonna get delayed just a few weeks.
But again, we're optimistic we're gonna get to that point.
Are you ready to give us an idea about a recommendation on that, the buy-in part of it for the 84 and how we handle that? Or is that still something that we'll...
It's still a
we'll
little
see
bit,
how-
yeah, again, I think we can work through that. Clearly, you know, that's something we could potentially pay out of fund balance, or we know, again, we're gonna be borrowing for potentially a quick trip, and, you know, that's got a major purchase out there as well, so if we could, you know, potentially borrow for that. Yeah, so options are open yet, and that doesn't have to be decided. In short, we don't have to make that payment until, at least I told them we'd be good by the end of the year.
Okay, everybody had the agreement to take a look at. It's been reviewed by committee. Are there any more questions? And whether the questions are for the chief administrator or the committee?
I'll make a motion, we approve the ladder truck agreement with the rural.
Second.
We have a motion and second. It is on the floor for any further discussion concerning the agreement with the rural for the ladder truck. Hearing none, roll call, please.
Councilmember Schofield.
Yes.
Councilmember Raisler.
Yes.
Councilmember Schneider.
Yes.
Councilmember Hooker.
Yes.
Councilmember Hartung.
Yes.
Councilmember Gillis.
Yes.
All in favor?
Motion's agreed to. The agreement is approved. Any other thing report from for the ambulance?
No, just, I talked to Director Miller just a little bit. It's been a busy month, a lot of car accidents and things like that. See, things Dan's talked about, so. They've hit their mark so far, but it's continuing to struggle on staffing.
Public Works and Utilities, Engineers Report, Russ?
Yes, good evening, just one item to report under the engineer's report. The DOT announced late last week a new grant program that's part of the infrastructure bill that was passed in Washington late last year. Wisconsin DOT is calling for the bipartisan transportation law, BIL, with, I think they got like a little over $1 billion they need to spend from 2022 to 2027. So it's exciting for a lot of municipalities. What they're doing is they're going to be running that program through what they call the local program. In the past, Durand and a lot of communities didn't qualify under that local program. That's the surface transportation, rural and urban, the local bridge program, and then also the TAP program. The surface transportation program pays for streets, curb and gutter, storm sewer, and so forth, similar to your LRIP application. You have a little different program than the LRIP. This one is federal funding, your LRIP is state funding, so there's a little more federal requirements as part of this. But they have solicitation that's coming out in two different segments. The first one is with an April deadline date, and that's primarily only for construction funding, and pretty much covers projects that are already in design or might be through the DOT system. They have some money they have to spend by the end of 2022, so those are construction only funds. The second part has a June 1st deadline date, and that can include design and construction engineering. Both programs are 80-20, 80% grant, 20% local match. The June application deadline date, that would carry projects through 2023 to 2027. So if there are any projects that the city decides to pursue, you'd have 5 years before it'd probably get approved through the review and approval process and the federal process. Construction funds probably wouldn't be available until that 25, 26, or 27 time period. So If you have any projects you want to pursue, you will have some time to look at it. I know we submitted a LRIP, Local Road Improvement Grant, for a project last cycle. Those awards are supposed to come out in March, so that might be a project that might fit that program. One thing they did add to this, like I said, in the past you haven't qualified. The Surface Transportation Urban Program, you had to have, your street had to be a major collector, but as part of this bill, they're changing the eligibility requirements. They're reducing it to collector streets or local roads, so that kind of brings in, you know, the townships and the villages and cities with all our roads coming in. The only problem is, of the $1 billion, 15% of that is to what they call the STP Flex. That brings in some of the money, but it's still quite a bit of money out there, so we'll, the application information is supposed to be coming out early next week in the guidelines, so once we get that information, we'll share it with city staff and determine if there's a project you may want to pursue with an application by January 1st. And if you do, that being a federally funded project, if you want to fund the design portion, you'll need to go through the DOT procurement process, to hire a consultant to help you with the grant application and the design. It's different than the LRIP. We can't just help you with the application, even if we're not charging for it. If we do, then we're disqualified from helping with the design on the project. So that's a process, pretty easy to follow. Just has to do a solicitation to consultants so they can respond to it, and then you review all the statement of qualifications that come in, you do a scoring system, and you send that to the DOT. So a lot of communities will be scrambling to get that process in and get that done and sent to the DOT so you can make that June deadline date for the applications process. So, but it's the exciting money that's out there.
100% covered?
Pardon?
100% covered?
In terms of the grant?
Yeah.
80/20.
80/20. Did you say that? Did I just say that?
Yeah, and actually...
That's only general fund expenditures, right, Russ? That's not water and sewer and anything?
No, right. Good point, Matt. Right. It only covers, again, the surface improvements, the typical street and storm sewer part of it. Though that's the eligible participating cost. You can include water and sewer with the project and so forth. That's non-eligible. You just list that in the application. The only issue is that it's through this program, it's not a local bid. It has to go through the DOT bid letting process and so forth. They handle all the bidding, you know, do the design, you give it all to the DOT. They bid it out, they award the bids, and then they oversee that portion of the construction too. So there's some extra engineering, DOT review, typical federal stuff that gets tacked onto it. So 80/20 is kind of a little bit misleading. Once, you know, going through the DOT bid, that's typical federal wage rate, so your bids are a little bit higher. You know, some of your costs going through the federal program are actually higher, so your 20% typically, if it's a simple project, can end up being, you know, more like 30% once you add in all the other stuff that goes with it. So, but we'll keep you posted once we have more. That's all I have.
Any questions for the city engineer? Next, discussion possible action regarding liquidated damages for the Laneview Avenue and Dryer Street project. First, city engineer has put together the numbers. We'll have him discuss that part of it, and then this is obviously for the finance committee. We'll have city administrator talk about it. So Russ, if you want to start.
Yes, you have a memo dated for myself, Russ Gibbons, city engineer, project manager, dated January 24th. I put this together just to help you along tonight as you discuss this item and reiterate some of the snippets from the signed contract agreement with the contractor. So I'll just run through this real quick and answer any questions, so hopefully this will help you with your decision tonight on this item on the agenda. So skid steer guy, you have on the item on your agenda, their pay request number 5 in the amount of $137,230.02. And it doesn't include any deduction for liquidated damage delay. The next item, we just reiterate what we've been talking about. The paragraph out of the agreement under Article 4, 402, contract time, dates A. Work shall be substantially completed on or before October 1st, 2021, and completed ready for final payment in accordance with paragraph 1506 of the general conditions on or before October 15th, 2021. So again, that's that October 1st date we've been talking about for several months. The next item, if you remember at your previous city council meeting, you approved the certificate of substantial completion that was signed and executed by Cedar Corp and Skid Steer Guy at your December 21st meeting that established the November 19th, 2021 substantial completion date. The next item refers to the contract and agreement again between the owner and contractor. Article 4, 4.03, liquidated damage, A1. Substantial completion, contractor shall pay the owner $1,485 for each day that expires after the time, parentheses, as duly adjusted pursuant to the contract specified in paragraph 402A above. Substantial completion on the work is substantially completed. That parentheses is just, that doesn't apply in this case. That's for if there were any foreseen circumstances as part of your pay request and you extended the substantial completion date or the final date. Nothing happened on the project that extended those, so that parentheses, that's what that refers to. Then the next item refers to the general conditions, Article 15. It outlines payments to the contractor, set-offs, completion, correction period. 15.01, progress payments. E, reductions in payment to the owner of 1. In addition to any reductions in payment, parentheses, set-offs recommended by the engineer, owner is entitled to oppose a set-off against payment based on any of the following. In item J, obviously there's a whole bunch of listed items that you can take from pay requests, but J is the one we're talking about tonight. Liquidated damages have accrued as a result of the contractor's failure to achieve milestone, substantial completion, or final completion. And then after that, we go into what we've been discussed over the past several months on the liquidated damages set off determination of days. Again, October 1st, 2021 was the contract substantial completion date. November 19th was the certificate of substantial completion date that was established. We counted on the calendars, we talked about that, that equals 50 days. So that's the liquidated damage delay set off, reduction in payment in terms of days. And then going to the second page, we talked that there were rain days that we had tracked as part of our work being on the project. So then you have our listing of the hours and the dates that we tallied up and we had in our records in terms of set off reduction in payment credit days for rain days, 32 hours. We called that 4 days. So then we went into the liquidated damage delay set off reduction in payment amount calculation. So we have the 50 days of liquidated damages minus the 4 days rain delay credit. So we come up with 46 days adjusted liquidated damage delay days. Take the 46 days that times the $14.85 per day, and it's $68,310 liquidated damage delay set off reduction in payment amount. And then the last paragraph, therefore, consulted with city staff, we recommend payment to Skid Steer Guy LLC in the amount of $68,920.02. And then the math is in parentheses. The amount they're requesting 137,230.02 requested, less the 68,310 in liquidated damages for it. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions, hopefully a little memo and summary.
So the one thing I'd like to have explained, just to see where, to make sure we know where we're at, because we have the payment agreement here. The recommendation's in front of us, which means we've decided how much we're gonna hold back. We're still holding back retainage, and we're still holding back for some work that hasn't been completed yet. This was explained to the Finance Committee, but I don't know if you want to explain.
Sure.
And then they figure there's another 15,000 work. Just to explain, if this action was taken tonight, what we would still owe besides the liquidated damages.
Right. So if you go to the contractor's application for payment number 5, the cover sheet, again, you have the original contract amount, $1,020,742.75. The total completed and stored to date as part of payment application number 5 is $984,617.65. The only items that we're aware of that are not in this pay request is the restoration work. We've actually worked with the contractor skid steer guy on our records in terms of quantities and so forth, so we think we're really close in terms of the quantities. So the only items that's not part of this pay request is some of the restoration. We didn't give them the entire quantity that's in the bed because we haven't had a chance to measure that yet in the field. Because if you remember, that was done right at the end of the project, and so we'll have to measure that up once the snow is gone to come up with that final quantity. So that's the only quantity that we're aware of that's not in there.
Just real quick, for the committees, we made an estimate of about 15,000.
Yep, that's about right.
Yeah, that's what we figured, Russ,
Yep.
about 15 grand.
Exactly.
So just before we move on, just, even if there's another 15 grand, that puts this project right at about $1 million, so we're 20,000 under budget.
Yeah, budget looks real good, as Matt says, in terms of the project, in terms of what was bid and final quantities, and no big surprises on change orders. Good point, Matt. So then the next item, we're still, your contract, when you get to this point, you're allowed to hold 2.5% retainage until final completion and final payment. So that's what the retainage amount that's listed. 49,230.88. So that's being held till the project's completed, probably till, springtime, till the grass restoration comes in and the punch list items are taken care of. So that's carried through. So holding 49,230. You go down with the math in terms of the amount again, less the retainage, less the previous payments, and that's how they come up with the 137,230.02. Any questions?
A couple of quick things too, just to note, whether it's liquidated damages or that it came in a little under, that there's $20,000 there, because of the fact that we've already borrowed that money can only be spent on, and you can explain.
Only be spent on another project, essentially, or it could go into debt service.
And that would help possibly pay because of the not doing any special assessments. That money could be used for that. Okay, so that leads us to actually the specific, and again, and I just, a quick report on liquidated damages. So let's say we go to this and that number now, no, hold it, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Can quickly explain, so we agreed to do this tonight. So obviously we have a contractor here that we're holding liquidated damages. What can the skid steer guy, what could that company do if they wanted to appeal or whatever? How does that work for us?
Yeah, he could come to one of your future meetings and plead his case and try to convince you to lower his liquidated damages. He has that right to do that. Whatever your decision is tonight, the way the contract is written, we'll need to work with city staff. A letter will go out to the contractor explaining your decision tonight, and I'll probably include some of the references to the contract documents and a general agreement with that. So it's pretty much holds whatever you decide to do. He can come and plead his case and whatever, we can listen to what he has. If he has something else that he thinks he wants to ask that delayed the project that we're not aware about, that would probably be the next step. I don't know if he'll do that or not.
But he does have the right to do it.
Yes.
Yeah, of course. Anything.
Yeah, he has the right to
Sure.
argue his case and.
So that brings
contest
us to the point where we're talking about the liquidated damages themselves, whatever that number ends up being. And if you'd like, that was discussed, we're not ready to make a decision on that yet because we don't know what the final number is. But then if you just want to, this was discussed by finance, just about some possibilities of what to do with that.
Yeah, so again, if we're looking at liquidated damages of just over $68,000, the finance committee talked about like, well, okay, what could we do with that? Those figures. Basically, we put it back in context of the dollars that we won't be collecting from special assessments. Again, real round figures, fair to say that those numbers were roughly about $200,000. Over 10 years, what we figure we would have to put on the levy to recoup that would be obviously about $20,000 a year. So one of the things we discussed with the $68,000, and like I said, whether it's the liquidated damages or any savings that we have in the project we've already borrowed the funds for, basically we only have two options. One, to roll it into another project, an eligible project, or two, to put it in the debt service fund to help offset the debt payments. So I think Member Schofield probably said it best at our committee. Basically, we're buying some time. But if we put it in the debt service fund, the $68,000. Essentially, if we're looking at about $20,000 a year debt payment that we would have had to tack on over and above what we thought from special assessments, we're buying ourselves roughly 3.5 years of not having to raise the levy over and above what we thought we were going to have to. If there's a $20,000 savings at the end of all this as well, that could get rolled there as well, potentially. But again, those are the only two places they can go, either debt service or another project. We couldn't take this money and divert it to some general fund project, or give Matt more money to salt streets or something like that. It's not an eligible project.
Because basically when we agreed to borrow the money, there's terms about that money. That money, you just can't go use it for anything else. Because
You can hold the money and use it 2 or 3 years out.
Oh yeah, you're in no hurry here. I mean, that's, yeah. And that's the other thing that we talked at the finance. I mean, we're not in any hurry. At this point, we don't have to make any decisions about how we spend this. We can keep this for a while. But at the end of whenever we choose to spend it, those are the only two things we can spend it.
And then while we're speaking specifically about this subject and we're saying about using it for this, because of the special assessments, it was also discussed at the Finance Committee, and this was the one thing about it is, so anybody who was going to be financed, about sending a letter to them, just explaining what the update based on council action. But then there are 5 property owners that asked for extra work. If you'd like to report on how we're going to handle those folks.
Yeah, we had, and again, I think there was only, sorry man, I don't have the numbers, but there was one customer that had, or 2 customers that were well over $1,000. One was almost over $5,000. Clearly, from the standpoint that they thought that they were going to get 10 years to pay it back, we're going to go back to them and talk on something probably not to exceed 5 years. And even from the standpoint of they asked for the extra work, hopefully, in the best case scenario, they just paid off. But from the standpoint of what they would have had to pay the special assessment, to kind of come back and say, well, this is roughly the 5,000 or the Mr. Blank, who was the other one, the amount that they'd have to pay. We like to get that done in just a few years. And if it is a few years, we're still going to charge the interest. They may choose to just pay it off and go from there. The other 3 properties were, I believe, under $500. Again, we're going to ask for the money for we'll give them until basically the end of next year to pay it. From the standpoint that it's still going to be done. It's still going to be cheaper than what they would have seen had we done the special assessment for 1 year at a time. So again, we don't.
We're guessing they'll probably just pay it. I don't think. But again, we'll work with them.
One was 5,500, one was 2,500, one was 9, and one was 5.
Okay. So anyway, so that's part of it. Anything else specifically on the liquidated damages, because then we'll move on to the thing about actually making the decision concerning the pay request from Stidskier Guy. So, I mean, there's still a lot more to come here. I mean, we'll be working with this as we go along, and as far as making those final decisions. But at least it gives you an idea financially where we're at with the project and with everything. Any other questions concerning that? Okay, next we'll move on to discussion possible action regarding the payment number 5 for Stidskier Guy LLC in the amount of $137,230.02 minus the amount determined by the City Council for liquidated damages, delay set off for the East Plainville Avenue and Dryer Street reconstruction project. Just to say how, when we discuss this in finance, again, so we would be approving the amount minus, that's what the motion would say, whenever, if we go, again, if we go with the recommendation recommendation of our engineering firm along with city staff, that's what it would be. Okay. So questions on that? Is there anything else you want to add to that to explain? Russ, is there anything else? Again, you have the numbers in front of you, and that's where we're at.
The only thing I would add is whoever makes the motion, I would recommend that I'm recommending the final payment, the 137 minus the liquidated damages for a payment of the 68,920. Make sure that's all in the minutes and we've got everything covered there.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments? Everybody feel comfortable? As I said, as we've worked through the process, everything all the way to determining what the substantial completion date was, being fair about any rain days, and so on, and obviously giving proper credit for those. I think we've done our best to do that in this situation.
I'll make the motion, we approve the pay request for the Stidskier Guy, $137,230.02 minus $68,310 in liquidated damages for a grand total of $68,920.02.
Is there a second?
Second.
And there's a second. Okay, on the floor for any further discussion. Questions or comments? Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Hartog.
Yes.
Councilmember Raisler.
Yes.
Councilmember Booker.
Yes.
Councilmember Gillis.
Yes.
Councilmember Schofield.
Yes.
Councilmember Schneider.
Yes.
All 6 in favor.
Motion's agreed to. Next, we move on to the monthly report. Superintendent Gillis.
Just a couple quick things. The lights for our street lights have arrived at Richardson's.
Ta-da.
Couple things here before we put them in. We need to make sure that we're getting all our promised credits. Once they're installed, we don't have any leverage to send them back and say, heck with you, we're going somewhere else. So we're gonna make sure that all the paperwork, all the I's and are dotted and the T's are crossed before we install them. And obviously, we're not gonna install them when it's sub-0 degree weather anyway. So we got some time before those even to wrap that up. Interviews for the Public Works trainee position were held last Wednesday night. We had 4 total applicants. They went really well. We interviewed everybody in one evening. We are doing some background checks and calling some references right now, and hopefully either by the end of this week, beginning of next week, we will have made an offer to one of the applicants. So as soon as that's all done and the applicant has accepted, I will announce that to the council. Other than that, we are status quo in the public.
Did Richardson give us a bid to install them, or did they charge us by the hour?
They gave us a bid to install.
So if they do it when it's cold, it takes them 2 days longer, that's on them.
So the more likely, the more we have to.
Okay, any questions for Public Works and Utilities? Hearing none, let's pay the bills.
reach so far.
I didn't realize it was in the group.
It's like I might be looking at this TV and tell stuff when I worked in the radio business.
Cable go up again?
I don't know where you pay
Yeah.
your attention. Mine.
My cable, I have
Did you Yankee missed one here, Herbie?
Did I?
Yeah.
I think it's $210 now.
If you do it, you're up on the hill, you're probably gonna get some good stuff.
That's okay. I just need to, I have one of the local jobs.
We don't have any. Watch, before you do it, ask me about it, I'll show you seriously, I bought like 4 or 5 different ones, trying them, and the best one I found was one of the cheapest ones.
I've always heard that the cheaper one usually works the best.
Mine must be off. That goes, but
Do you have to boogers at all?
you can, I don't. I found a spot where I can get 13, 28,
Replace that.
48.
That's a good
I need to pick up some of the cities once in a while.
That's all I need is those 3.
Yeah.
Weather, on 48. Otherwise I watch 13.
What's your feelings on
Cheap
this,
bills.
Scott? Should we try to get maybe a couple times a year? Or don't matter? Put me a phone train.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we typically like to get them a little more on time, but in that case, as long as we got them in the proper year.
Got him in the
But yeah,
proper year, and he had it all labeled out where it was and what it went and what each amount, so I was able to.
I know what he's trying to do.
Well, he doesn't have an office person, He has to be an office person, so.
As long as it's stocked.
Yeah, it's not the best way to do it, but
I got a bill for 3 different properties.
maybe he forgets something in the middle.
Yeah, it wasn't quite that much, but it's close.
You got anything open? Or do this?
No.
I don't know if people want to rent to who it is anyway, but at least I can say I asked.
I had 2 people call me some days. One of them, Russ.
Like answering one?
Before you go, they are
Committee for next Wednesday.
Yeah.
Obviously, we'll get a
dairy up
whole
there, dairy
whole rules, make sure that they know all
there,
this.
sounds like.
Oh, Radels out there, real Radels?
Is dairy, the big one is that.
Yeah, right out there past where we stickers and stuff, yeah. Or behind.
They had somebody, and I was like, but one of my daughter's classmates. Boy, it's not interesting.
I don't see any of those anymore.
Excellent energy. Breaking it.
Didn't they say their rates went up like 25%? Natural gas was almost gonna double?
My heating bill on my apartment is very electric. 200 some dollars more.
I could run, I potentially have questions.
It's out of control.
Better ask me that.
It's out of control enough to where I'm thinking about that. You can't put solar panels on top of the building.
It's time, Dick.
Would somebody like to make a motion to approve the vouchers?
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the vouchers. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Schofield.
Yes.
Councilmember
That's
Schneider.
how that works, yes.
Councilmember Raisler.
Yes.
Councilmember Booker.
Yes.
Councilmember Hartsock.
Yes.
Councilmember Gillis.
Yes.
All in favor.
The vouchers are approved as presented. Future agenda items, does anybody else have anything? Just remember, we do have a regular council meeting coming up on the 9th, but coming up next Wednesday at 4 p.m. It'll be a combination of public welfare parks. We have a couple of community groups to talk about future park development, and that will be the 2 major items on the agenda coming up at 4 p.m. on February 2nd. As far as any other committees, I know we talked about public safety. Are we ready to schedule? Is there enough to?
We'll talk next week.
And economic development, we could put daytime. I could do daytime.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
date night is better for me.
Okay, yeah, that's great.
So just so you have more flexibility then.
Which is the one next Wednesday?
That's public,
Parks, public welfare.
and the Parks Board.
How long are we?
Usually I'm going, but I'll just pick it out.
If you
Well, we
take a
said
while,
4 o'clock. Do you have something else? Did
I
you?
have a meeting at 5.
That's right, you actually told us that. We said we would try to get everything in an hour, because basically, they're just presenting information. We're not gonna be, and asking questions. We're not gonna be making any decisions as far as recommendations at that point. This is just starting the ball rolling on both of those subjects that have been presented to us. So yeah, so I don't see that as a problem.
Just an agenda item for public safety. I don't know if we've got, are we looking at expanding the on-call distance that stated in the,
That's an item that,
or?
you're talking ambulance, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're looking at any of the stuff we were talking about looking at as far as making it easier to get people to take calls or be on call.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's pretty likely we're gonna have a public safety meeting in the near future to make sure that that is.
Just like this long term agenda, so if we want to talk about it.
Not to beat that horse,
I know you are.
where are we at with email addresses?
So, I mean, two pieces of that, man. At this point, we're in a little bit of limbo with the elections, but, yourself and Steve and Mark will be priority because you guys are.
I'm not concerned with it, I'm mostly talking, like, today again, I had to send some emails to both Jamie and Mike, and both of them were very sensitive, and it's like, I hate sending kind of a sensitive email.
And you mentioned that point before, and I know it's.
No,
Yeah, and so we've talked through intent with that, and that doesn't seem to be a big issue. It's gonna cost a little bit, but again, that's fine. And then
Yeah,
go ahead.
Because of elections, they've been really pushing us to get a .gov email address. So that might, we're gonna try to work with EdTech to see if there's something that we can do too. Because they really want us to have a .gov email address to just be more formal,
Yes.
a lot bigger. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else from the council?
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Second. We have a motion and second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.